when you use these high yielding varieties. So so think of this experiment where like they would randomly choose some plots, agricultural plots, they and some so random those randomly chosen plots will be assigned this treatment of high yielding varieties. So okay, good, recording has started. So so some plots, agricultural plots, were randomly chosen, and those plots were cultivated with these high yielding varieties. The rest of the plots were there, they cultivated the traditional variety. And once the varieties were matured, and when you harvest these crops, the difference in the yields of the plots where you had high yielding varieties and the plots where you didn't have high yielding varieties, that difference was attributed to using these new variety of seeds, right? So these were the kinds of experiments, statistical experiments that were done at that time. And this is example from agriculture, but you can take such examples from like different disciplines also. So for example, in medicine, they do these kind of experiments all the time. Like in for example, this you would have been reading of this COVID trials, vaccine trials, and the new therapy trials and all those things. So there, the kind of statistics they do is exactly of this sort, where they would randomly choose some people, and those randomly chosen people are given a treatment. So they are called the treated people, right? So those randomly chosen people are given some treatment. It can be anything, it can be a medicine, or in agriculture case, it can be fertilizer or high yielding variety. And then you have a control group, right? And the control group is not given the treatment, and that's why it's called the control. And once you give the treatment, after that you would look at their outcomes. For example, in case of this the agriculture experiment, the outcome was the yields of those plots, the treated plots where you had HYVs, and the control plots where you had the traditional varieties. In case of a vaccine trial, like the COVID vaccine, the treated people would be people who were given the vaccine, and the control people were people who were not given the vaccine. Okay, so two things are important, although it may sound, I mean, it's quite obvious, but it's still important for me to emphasize it, that two things are important for experiments. One is that, of course, you will give some group of people the treatment, okay? But to actually gauge the impact of the treatment, you need a control group, right? But you need a group which was not given a treatment to compare the outcomes. And the other thing is the treatment itself, right? So the treatment would be assigned to one group and not assigned to the other group. So so it's a very simple setup, nothing complicated, and the statistics behind it is also quite simple. In statistics, pure statistics, the difference in the outcomes of the treated and the control group is called the causal effect of the treatment. Okay, so so that is how causality would be defined in stats in this, when in the context of experiments, whether it is biostats or whether it's agricultural stats or whatever. These are this is the way statisticians have been establishing causality. Okay, and the logic is that if you randomly select people into treatment, then by the design of the experiment itself, the no other factor other than the treatment will influence their outcomes, right? So this comes from, remember last time we talked about the random sample assumption, that it's IID, right? So there in regression we were making such an assumption, but here in an experiment, in a pure experiment, if you randomly like you randomly choose people and then assign those people uh, uh, the treatment, then by design itself, the treatment that you are giving is so the outcome of the treated group is only influenced by the treatment. Okay, so it's the nature of the experiment itself which ensures causality here. Okay, so um, so and this setup has a name in statistics. Okay, this setup is called, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay. So in case if you have any confusion or anything, stop me and ask questions. So you understand what I mean by treatment group and control group, right? You would have heard of this in the context of the vaccine trials that are going on nowadays.
Yes, sir, we have heard about it before.
So you understand what I mean by randomly. So see, if you go through newspapers and you read about these vaccine trials, how are these people? If you have given like read through these things in detail, and you can do that now. So in fact, most of the research on these vaccine trials is on public domain. So you can go and read that. And the biostatistics papers are quite simple. I mean, they don't have complicated. Of course, the mechanisms and all those things be complicated. But if you look at the results that they report in a biostat paper, they are quite simple. They would just give you the outcome of the treatment and the control. But what is the logic there? The logic is that since the vaccine was assigned randomly to some people, okay, and the rest, the control group was not assigned any treatment, um, what like the outcomes of those two groups can actually be called as the causal effect of the vaccine, right? You understand what the logic,
Yes.
right? And the reason why it's causal is because by design of the experiment itself, the assignment of the treatment was random. So it is by design uncorrelated with any other variable. So this is, I mean, like in practice, it may be correlated with some variables, but strictly speaking, definitionally, it's not. It should not be. Okay. So this kind of framework in statistics and biostatistics is called Rubin's causal model. It was proposed by Rubin, and so let's go through it. So some history of this the Rubin's causal model. So historically, as I already said, historically causal inference in statistics is based on randomized experiment. Okay, and you can have examples from all different disciplines, sciences, social sciences, um, and this kind of a literature actually arose. The random experiment literature arose quite differently from the econometrics literature, the structural econometrics literature that we have been talking about. Okay, so like early 1960s, 50s, these were two different literatures. Okay, and there was nothing. So in econometrics, as I already we talked about it, econometrics things were done in a structural way. You would write some demand equations, some supply equations, using your economic theory, and then you will get a reduced form, and then the reduced form will tell you what is endogenous and what is exogenous. Okay, and but in statistics and in this experiments literature, they had a totally different way of identifying causality, what is influencing what, and it was via these experiments, randomized experiments. So Rubin 1974 proposed the use of potential outcomes. So basically what Rubin did was he interpreted this um, the randomized experiment literature into a potential outcome framework, and we will talk about what this potential outcome framework is. And what actually in that sense it was quite revolutionary what he did. because the way he floated this idea of how random experiments are identifying causality helped econometrics a lot. Okay, so the modern econometrics, especially modern applied microeconomics and these program evaluation impact assessment studies are mainly, if you go through these papers, they mainly talk about identification within this context of the, this potential outcome framework. So in that sense, his work was quite revolutionary, because he was the one who made these connections between what economists were doing with their structural models and what statisticians were doing with their experiments. Okay, and he interpreted that in this potential outcomes framework. But in statistics as well as in econometrics now, I should not say all econometrics, but in this literature, this applied microeconomics literature, where people are concerned about causality and identification, randomized experiments are considered the gold standard for causal studies. So what I mean by gold standard is that, if suppose you were trying to see the impact of, some, let's say, can be anything. So if you suppose you're interested in the assessing the impact of a treatment T on some individuals, the best way of establishing causality, or the best way of assessing that impact, would be by a randomized experiment. That is what these people say. Okay, we can debate on it. Economists do debate on it, whether that is the gold standard or not. But in this literature, especially in statistics, randomized controlled trials are considered to be the gold standard for establishing any sort of causality. And that's why in biostatistics, or I mean, uh, one example of um, this being the gold standard in establishing causality is, if you look at the biostats and medical literature. Okay, the only thing biostatisticians and the people in medicine do are experiments when they are establishing causality. So they would not do. You will not find a paper in medical science where people would have an instrument for, like they gave a medicine and then the instrument was whatever, some nurse educational qualification of the nurse who was dealing with the patient and so on. They think it is just to, like if you read what statisticians think about structural models and instrumental variable estimation and simultaneous equations and all those things, you would, like they are really critical of these methods. Okay, and the only thing they take seriously is randomized experiments. So it's definitely there. It's definitely considered to be the gold standard for establishing any causal effects. Okay, and economists, applied microeconomists, and the people who do impact evaluation also have now started, um, considering randomized experiments as the gold standard. By the way, the Nobel Prize, not this. When did Abhijit Banerjee got the Nobel Prize? I think it was last year, right?
Yes,
Uh,
sir.
sorry.
Yeah, it was the last one.
Yes,
Like the one
yes,
before this one.
right. So Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo got the Nobel Prize, and they got the Nobel Prize exactly for this thing, because they were the ones who uh, revolutionized the use of experiments in development economics. So it's now, even in economics, RCTs are now considered to be the best way of establishing a causal relationship. Although,
Sir,
yeah.
so just a doubt in terms of these groups that we have.
Mm,
Are these groups fairly homogeneous, or because we want to see a causal effect of an external or an exogenous variable, or
mm.
do we even allow for heterogeneity between these groups?
We do. It depends upon the experiment itself. So, for example, if like in a vaccine trial, let's say, um, you would like to test it on people of different age, gender, like so that you can the results that you get are quite universal in terms of their applicability. But heterogeneity is also considered in an experiment. Although what we'll talk about today does not incorporate heterogeneity into an experiment, but uh, it is important in experiments. It also depends upon the nature of your problem. So, for example, if you are testing blood pressure medication, okay, you are testing whether a blood pressure medication um, reduces your blood pressure or not, then what would be your relevant group? It would be people who are, who have high blood pressure, isn't it? So, heterogeneity would also depend upon the nature of your the kind of experiment you are trying to conduct, and what is the treatment, and what should be the relevant population for this treatment. Okay. Um, but we do look at heterogeneity within that relevant population. We will talk about that when we go through papers. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So um, yes, so randomized experiments are considered to be the gold standard for causal studies, even in economics now. And so, what is this Rubin's causal model? It's a very simple idea, nothing complicated here. So, and it's a theoretical construct. It's the Rubin's causal model is, you can think of the Rubin's causal model as not exactly, but it's roughly comparable to the theoretical, uh, the theoretical structural equations that we had in our structural model. So it's in that sense, this construct, the Rubin's causal model, this construct is a theoretical concept. It as you will see, it's not it's there to it helps us in thinking about causality. Okay, but it's not that you will observe all of the things that the Rubin causal model, all the elements that the Rubin causal model has. Okay. So it's more like our structural equations in a structural model. Okay, we don't observe them. So, the Rubin's causal model has two essential elements. Okay, and together they are called the potential outcomes with assignment mechanism. Okay, so the first part is conceptual, and it defines causal effects as comparisons of potential outcomes under different treatment conditions on a common set of units. So, um, we will talk about what these potential outcomes are, but there are two elements to this. One is potential outcomes, so what outcomes you have after treatment, and then the other is the assignment mechanism. So the assignment mechanism is essentially you giving treatment to some people and not giving to other people. So that's the assignment mechanism. Okay. So these two are the only parts actually to the Rubin's causal model: the potential outcome and the assignment mechanism. So let's like now start putting things together. So so before we go on to actually writing it up, let's have like go through some definitions. So these are some basic concepts which are used to define causal effects in the Rubin's causal model. So it's not this whole construct is not very complicated, but we have to keep this structure in mind, I think, throughout the course, because all the papers that we are going to read may talk about these may mention these terms like potential outcomes and treatment and assignment mechanism, and so we should you should keep these terms in mind throughout the course. Okay.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, when you gave the definition of potential outcomes, you
Right.
said they are outcomes on a common set of units under different conditions.
Right.
right? So if like you are checking a single unit and what are their different outcomes of that unit, right?
Right, right.
Okay, then heterogeneity won't come into play here, right?
It can, uh, it can, because each individual may respond differently to the treatment, right? Even
Okay,
potentially,
yeah.
isn't it? So that's why what we calculate, what we calculate in regressions is something called the average treatment effect, which is the average of everybody's response to that treatment. But within the average treatment effect, you may have so then there is something called the treatment effect on the treated. Okay, so what that means is that only the treated group, only for the treated group, this was the difference. So it can still it can still be there, but we will just look at. But here we consider the average of across all individuals. So the first thing that we have here is the unit. A unit is what unit are you working at? A unit is a physical object. For example, it can be a patient. Okay, it can be a plot, a field, a household, whatever. Right? It's the unit. So so a patient at a particular place and a point in time, okay, say t. So there is also a time dimension here. So the unit is the is who's given the treatment. Okay, so that's the unit. So what is a treatment? A treatment is an action or intervention that can be initiated or withheld from that unit at time t. Okay, if the treatment is withheld, we call it the control group. So what is the treatment? Very simple. It's basically the intervention. Okay, that either you give to some people or you don't give to some people at that time t. Okay, so so people to whom you give this treatment, they are the treated group. Who are not given this treatment are the control group. Okay. Potential outcomes. So associated with that unit are two potential outcomes at a future point in time. So once at time t, you select some units, you randomly give some of them the treatment, others you don't give the treatment, and at some time t star, in future, okay, the value of some outcomes is measured. Okay, so that outcome can be anything, depends upon what your context is. Okay, so that let's call that outcome y, right? So we have a unit, we have a treatment, and then we have the outcomes, observed outcomes. So if treated at t, the potential outcome at t star is y1. Okay, if control at t, the potential outcome at t star is y0. So the bracket, the number within bracket is denoting whether you were in the treated group or the control group. So 1 if you were treated, okay, and 0 if you were not treated. And so y bracket 1 is basically telling you the outcome of the individual who was treated, and by bracket 0 is telling you the outcome of individual who was not treated. Okay. So the causal effect of the treatment on that unit is defined to be the comparison of the treatment and control potential outcomes at t star. So the causal effect, given this structure, what is the causal effect? The causal effect of treatment is just comparing y1 and y0. So the difference between y1 and y0 will give you the effect of that treatment. Okay. Now the reason why we are calling these potential outcomes is as follows. What this is saying is that with each unit, with each associated unit, okay, there would be two outcomes. Okay, so for each unit I, you would have a y1 and a y0. Now it is potential in the sense that the group which was treated, for them you don't observe their outcome at control, right? For example, for somebody who is treated, the only thing that you can observe at point T star is Y1, right? But this potential outcome framework also wants Y0, meaning for the same individual, the outcome when that individual was not treated. So that is potential. We don't observe the same individual being treated and non-treated, right, at the same point in time. You will either observe that individual as treated, or you will observe that outcome when that individual is treated, or you will observe the outcome when that individual is controlled. But the Rubin's causal model says that the treatment effect is the difference between the outcome of the same individual when that individual is treated and the outcome of the same individual when the individual is not treated. So in that sense, both of these outcomes cannot be observed at the same time. Hence, these are potential. Okay, you understand what this means? Because this is important. The idea of potential outcome is important here because that is how the whole causal effect is defined in based on this potential outcome. So is if you have any questions or any, if you're not clear, not clear about what this means, then I think you should ask.
Sir, theoretically, this is fine, and I understand why this is potential. But I just had a very practical question. So, like, what is the is there any recommendation to the size of the test group and the control group? Like, if this is the population size that I have, where I can apply an RC.
Yeah, there is actually, when you do these things, when you are actually doing experiments, you have to do something called power calculations. Okay, and those power calculations are done exactly the reason why you are giving. It has to for that effect to actually mean anything statistically. Okay, you have to calculate what should be the sample of the treatment group and the control group for you to say something meaningful about the treatment. But those are, we won't talk about them because we are not going to talk about, like the papers that I have, the list of papers that I have, we will not go through RCTs, okay? Because the thing with RCTs is that they are a gold standard for identifying causal effect, but the problem with RCTs is one that they are very expensive. Okay, not everybody can conduct an RCT. Number two is that there are issues with RCTs also, especially in economics. The problem with RCTs is that and there are many. If you go through the literature, you will find them. So, for example, there can be spillover effects. The treatment spillovers to other units, right? For example, if you give money to some people randomly, they may talk to their neighbors, and then so the treatment is then contaminated in that sense. And then there are things called, there are issues of applicability of the results. Okay, so whether you can generalize the findings from an RCT, because a randomized experiment by its very nature is controlling everything else. Okay, so it's, if you are doing an RCT, you are actually in a very strict sense identifying the particular structural equation, whatever your structure may be. But in reality, the result that you got from an RCT may not be replicable in real life, right? Because of variety of reasons. Because in real life you have general equilibrium effects, and economic agents are rational and they will make decisions and so on and on. So, we will not talk about these kind of things like power calculations and how big the sample size be and all those things. We will use the structure the structure that we are going through here to think of how the regressions that economists have been doing with observational data, how there using this structure we can think of causality. Okay, is that fine? Okay. So, okay. So you understand what I mean by potential outcome. Okay. So in this Rubin's causal model, what it says is that for you to estimate the treatment effect, you should observe the individual's outcome both when the individual is treated and the individual is non-treated. Okay, so one of that outcome will be potential, depending on whether that individual is in the treatment group or the control group. You can't observe both outcomes for the same individual at a point t star, right? So in that sense, one of the outcome is potential, but to truly get that treatment effect, you need both of them. That is what the structure says. Okay, so now comes the fundamental problem of causal inference. Given that this is the structure that we have now, here is the fundamental issue with establishing causality. Okay, the treatment effect for individual I, as I already said, is basically yi1 minus yi0, right? So this difference for each individual I, this gap between the potential outcome when the individual is treated and the potential outcome when the individual is in control, this difference gives you the treatment effect for that individual. Now the challenge in causal inference is that we can never observe both yi1 and yi0 for any unit I. We only observe one. So this basically like spells out the key issue with establishing causality. That the problem is that to really establish causality, you need both of these objects. Okay, and we don't observe both of them for any unit simultaneously. Okay, we don't observe that. And it's in the literature, it's called the fundamental problem of causal inference. So, whenever you think of, whenever you see a regression or a regression output, or whenever you are reading a paper, or in general also, whenever you are thinking of estimating some regressions, do keep in mind this idea of this fundamental problem of causal inference, because it's very helpful in trying to understand what we want to estimate and what we actually have with us when we are running these regressions. Okay. And so this terminology of fundamental problem of causal inference is mainly statisticians. This comes from statistics, and it basically termed by statisticians. But economists also know it as the fundamental problem of program evaluation. So in economics, we are interested in evaluating the impact of some program. It can be anything, any government program or anything. So there we call it the fundamental problem of program evaluation. Okay. And another term which you would have heard, or would have read, is this counterfactual. Okay, and so the one of the potential outcome is not realized. Okay, is unobservable, and it's also called the counterfactual. So to use it in a context, let's say that in the vaccine experiment. What you would like, according to this Rubin's causal model, is once you give the vaccine, you would like the same individual, that individual's outcome when the vaccine was given to that individual, and that individual outcome when the vaccine is not given to that individual. So one of the outcome is the counterfactual, okay, counter to the fact, it's not observed, but ideally you need that counterfactual to get the treatment effect. Okay, so when we read these papers, or in general also, you will hear, when you read economics literature, you will even statistics literature, you will find these terms being used quite often. The unobservables, non-observable, potential outcome, and counterfactual. They essentially mean the same thing. Okay, so that's your fundamental problem of causal inference, that we don't observe the counterfactual. Okay, and some assumptions which are quite reasonable in that setup. okay, which we have to make if we want to, you know, if we want to, if we think, if you know, if RCA, this Rubin's causal model has to assure us that it gives us the treatment, the true treatment effect, we have to make some assumptions, and this is called the stable unit treatment value assumption. Okay, SUTVA. Okay, and what is this assumption? It basically says that the potential outcomes for any unit do not vary with the treatment assigned to other units. So it's a very reasonable thing to assume. It's saying that so if you know, if there should be no spillover here. So for example, if you are giving treatment to one unit, it should not be that the potential outcome of the other unit is influenced by the treatment or to some other individual or unit. Okay, so no spillovers in that sense. So it's called, and in economics, as you would you know, like as you would think, in economics, this is violated quite often, because in economics we are dealing with agents, rational agents, you know, you who interact, and so generally the biggest problem we have with experiments in economics is that there are spillover effects. So this assumption is, you know, this part of this assumption is not satisfied. Okay, there are spillover effects. So generally what people will do in economics is that they will, rather than treating individuals, for example, if you think of you know, like some experiment in rural India, you know, if you give randomly assign people in a village some treatment, okay, the people, individuals in the village will talk to their neighbors and so on. So what people do generally is that rather than randomly assigning people treatment within a village, they would randomly assign treatment to the whole village. So they would, from let's say a district or a state, they would randomly choose the complete villages, and then they would assign treatment to the whole village, and some villages would be kept as control groups. Okay, so so the economists have to deal with this issue, that you know, there would be spillovers. And the other thing is that for each unit, there are no different versions of the treatment level. So it should not be that you know, your treatment level varies with individual to individual, right? It should be consistent across all units. So that's another reasonable assumption that that we have to make here. Okay, so these are no interference and no hidden variation of treatments. Okay, and these are roughly comparable if you think of the structure in econometrics or if you think of these assumptions in the context, you know, in econometrics or in linear regressions, or even in our structural model that we had, these are you know, comparable to what we have in you know, what the kind of exclusion restrictions that we have in econometrics. So for example, in our demand supply example, you know, the demand supply structural model that we were talking about, there in the demand equation, you know, you had we had income. So we were saying that, you know, in the demand equation, demand is also a quantity demanded of a commodity, or is also influenced by income, and but supply is not influenced by income. Similarly, you can say that supply is influenced by some exogenous supply shocks. So for example, rainfall shock, if you're talking about demand and supply of an agricultural commodity. But that shock, that exogenous supply shock, is does not feature in the demand equation. So when you solve the reduced form, you know, you would have these exclusion restrictions, that this variable is there in the demand equation but not there in the supply equation. This variable there in the supply equation is not there in the demand equation. And those exclusion restrictions on those variables actually will help you in identifying the true parameters of the structural model. And I will talk about structural, these exclusion restrictions in econometrics. In fact, I will try to talk about these exclusion restrictions and the Rubin causal model itself in the original example that we started with, the demand and supply example. And there is a very nice paper. I don't know how much time you have and how interested you are in this literature, but let me shift my screen to okay. Oh. But there is this very nice paper by so can you see this paper now on your screens?
Yes, sir, we can.
So there is this very nice paper by Imbens, Guido Imbens, and he's quite a well-known guy in this literature. And if it's a bit not, I mean, it some of the concepts here may be a bit advanced, but it's a nice read. So if you people are really interested, in the next few classes, I will talk about some of the ideas here. I won't go through all of it because we are not interested in the whole story, but it's a nice paper. If I would strongly suggest that all of you should go through it, but people who are really interested in this literature and are planning to go for research, like economic, this kind of applied microeconomic research should definitely read this paper. It basically interprets this whole idea of structural econometrics, the reduced form that we do, and the causal experiments. The kind of this Rubin's causal model that we are talking about today. It basically connects all of these into one framework, and it's not. I feel it's not very technical, so you can go through it, but it gives you the history, behind the statistics literature, and then it talks about some very important assumptions that we will also talk about in the next few classes. Okay, and then it gives you some examples, and these examples are really helpful in understanding what these things are meaning. And Imbens and Athey, if you know these people, Susan Athey and Guido Imbens, they are at the they are at the cutting edge of econometrics. In fact, this literature on machine learning they are the ones who are actually interpreting the ideas that we have in machine learning, how those can be used in causal inference. So they are trying to basically join this literature on causal inference, this kind of a literature, Rubin's causal model, into the machine learning literature that we have. And so somebody, if you are interested in econometrics and what is happening in econometrics, I mean this kind of econometrics, then I think you should definitely read this paper. Okay? It's in that sense quite useful. So I will talk about some of this in the next few classes. And so he is working with this classic example of supply and demand. Okay, and he's talking about supply and demand. He talks about the structural equations like we talked about, and then he later on interprets this whole story in the Rubin's causal model. So he tells you how what we do in structural econometrics, or the identification, that the problem of identification in structural econometrics is actually he draws parallels between the identification problems in structural econometrics with the identification problem in the causal experiments or the Rubin's causal model framework. So he talks about this in the context of instrumental variable, because classic, when people were thinking of this problem of identifying demand and supply, they were thinking of this in terms of instrumental variables. I don't know whether you have done instrumental variables or not previously, but So we will do some of it in next few classes. And then a nice example, like nice pictures to explain what is happening, okay, what is the problem. And then it goes on to talk about some advanced concepts of compliance and local average treatment effects, and some of it we will also talk about, but I don't want to go too deep into this because um, we don't want to cram too much into this course. But whatever is necessary for our reading of those papers that we have, we will go through that. Okay. So, anyways, where were we? So these are the assumptions that these are the assumptions that we have to work with, and they are akin to what we call exclusion restrictions in econometrics. So quite similar. Okay. So now the selection problem. Okay, so what is this selection problem? So let's say that the treatment status is defined by this variable D. Okay. So DI means the treatment status for each individual I, and it can be yeah.
So just a small doubt. Can you explain the second point on the previous slide? I sort of missed that. Yeah.
Oh, so basically here the idea is that you should not be giving different strengths of treatment to different individuals, right? It should be consistent. So in the context of, let's say, you are giving some medication to people, then that the amount of medication that you are giving to these individuals should be consistent across the whole treated group. Okay, that's the idea. And the reason why you would make such an assumption is that if you vary the strength of the treatment across individuals, then you don't know what you are getting, whether you're getting the effect of the treatment or whether you are getting the effect of the variation in the treatment. Okay. In terms of an economics example, it can be that if you are, like let's say randomly giving people some money or whatever food grains, then the amount of food grains that you give should be consistent across individuals. Okay. Different versions of treatment. It can also be different versions in the sense that basically the treatment that you have should be consistent and same for all treated individuals. That's the idea. So,
yes, understood. Thank you.
So what is this selection problem? And the selection problem is very important. It's very important for us to get a hang of selection problem in economics, because in fact all issues in identification, this literature can be interpreted as some kind of a selection problem, okay, or selection bias. And the reason why selection problems are so important in economics is that we economists deal with rational decision makers, right? And these are optimizing agents in the sense that they continuously optimize their objective functions given constraints, and so since they do that, they can decide, okay, where to end up strategically, whether to be in the treatment group or whether to be in the control group. So since we are not dealing with plots of land which are not rational, cannot make decisions, or we are not dealing with something which cannot make a decision by itself, you will definitely invariably end up having some kind of selection. Okay, and what is this selection? So we have a treatment DI which is either 0 or 1. 0 if no treatment was given to that unit, 1 if treatment was given to that unit. And the question is essentially the question in causal inference is whether YI, which is the outcome for that individual, is affected by the treatment DI or not, right? So the potential outcomes can be interpreted in the following way. So YI1 is the potential outcome given that the individual was treated, DI is equal to 1, YI is equal to 0, the potential outcome when the individual is not treated, given that the DI, the treatment status, is 0. Okay. So you can write YI as this, right? YI1 times di plus yi0 times 1 minus di, right? You can write it like this. Why can you write it like this? Because you can see that basically either it would be actual observed yi, which is this, will either be y1 or y0, depending upon whether that unit was treated or whether that unit was controlled. So it's interpreting observed outcomes, observed outcome for the individual yi in terms of the potential outcomes, okay, given the treatment status. And it can manipulate this equation to write it this way also, okay. yi0 is equal to yi1 minus yi0 di. And remember, notice, like what one has to keep in mind here is that, as somebody pointed out, that you would have distributions of both yi1 and yi0. So the treatment effect can be different for different people. Exactly what somebody pointed out in terms of the heterogeneity. Okay. But what one has to appreciate here is that the Rubin's causal model does not abstract away from heterogeneity, because everything here has an I subscript, right? So it's not that it does not consider that. So this observed outcome is we are thinking of the potential outcome for each individual here. Okay, in a regression, or like if you think of a regression, on the other hand. And we will come to that. I will we will draw comparisons between this and the regression. But in a regression, the effect, the beta that you get, okay, is an average over everybody. So it's not beta I, but it's beta here. As you can see, we will we have yi0. So the treatment effect is for each unit in definitionally, at least. Okay. I'm not saying that actually you will estimate it this way, but the treatment effect in this structure is for each individual I, okay, and that it's the difference between the potential outcomes. So in that sense, treatment effect can be different for different people. There would be a distribution of treatment effect. So if you could observe both of these yi and y0 for all the individuals that you have, the potential outcomes, you can get the treatment for each individual ti, and then you can plot a distribution. And I will, in fact, I have an example here. I don't know whether I'll be able to do that today, but I have an example here where I will show you the distribution, okay, in the context of an observational study, not in the context of an experiment. Both potential outcomes for any one person is never observed. Hence, we calculate the average treatment effect. So here is the problem. It is heterogeneous, we know it, but since we don't observe yi1 and yi0 simultaneously, we cannot calculate TI, treatment effect, for each individual. So what we have to make do with is the average treatment effect. And what is the average treatment effect? Here is the average treatment effect. I think I will not go beyond this because this is important, and we want to spend as much time as we can, understanding what this thing is. So average treatment effect can be written in this way also. So expectation of yi, the observed outcome, conditional on the unit being treated, minus the expectation of yi, this is the observed yi, conditional on di, the treatment not given. So this is the control, okay? And you can interpret this in this potential outcome structure, right? What we have here, this. So you can write it like this. Okay. And if you take this di1 right, so you can write it like this: yi0 plus yi1 minus yi0, conditional on di is equal to 1, minus this term, okay? And then if you take this di inside, it's simple algebra, you can take it inside, and then you can split this object here into two parts. So the first part is expectation of yi 1 condition on di is equal to 1 minus expectation of yi 0 condition on di is equal to 1. Okay, so this is the first part. So this is and then you have this second part which is in red. So if this is expectation of yi 0 condition on di is equal to 1 minus expectation of yi 0 condition on di is equal to 0. So the average treatment effect is actually this blue object that we have here. Okay, and what is this blue object? It's saying that expected value of the potential outcome when the individual is treated, individual I, expected value of the potential outcome for the treated individual, when expected outcome in control for the control when that individual is not treated in the treated group. So sorry. So this we observe, right? This object we observe, but this object is unobservable, isn't it? Because how can you observe that individual's outcome when that individual is not treated, when that individual is in the treated group, right? When the treatment was given to that individual. And similarly, this object is sorry. This object is so the treatment status is equal to 1, the potential outcome for 0, and the treatment status is equal to 0, the potential outcome is 0. So this object that we have is called the selection bias. Okay, so the selection bias is this red object, and the true treatment effect is this blue object. And as you can see, these terms, some of these terms are unobservable in the data itself. So right.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, can you explain why it's selection bias, or can you again explain it?
I will. I'm going to move to regressions now. Okay, and here you will get an idea as to how this object here relates to these error terms, and then I hope that will clarify why this is selection bias. But I don't want to go any further, one, because I have this terrible cold, and I hope it's not COVID. And I also want to stop and ask questions if you have any. Questions or views, thoughts, anything that
Sir,
you would
actually,
like.
I have a question. What actually we are planning to do here? I mean, why is this selection bias term coming, and why is this unobservable effect? Can you give the intuition behind this big term?
Yeah.
All of this.
Yeah. So the thing is, the intuition behind this is the following. Basically, in experiments, we have basically, when we assign treatment to individuals, that we say that the treatment should be unconfounded. Okay, by unconfounded we mean that there should be nothing else which should be influencing the treatment. Okay, so for example, and so that something else can be something observable, right? So for example, how should I can't give an example from experiments where I can't think of an example from experiments, but let's say let me think of an example. Actually, I have an example there. The reason why we are thinking of selection bias, talking about selection bias in these experiments, is because we want to take this framework, Rubin's causal model framework, to regressions. Okay, and in regressions, we have how do we interpret this idea of potential outcome versus observed outcome in a regression where we have an error term and we have control variables? Okay, so in a regression, suppose I don't want to go through my example right now. I have an example here which I hope will clarify what I'm trying to say in terms of selection bias. But there is a reason for it. Okay, we will take this to regressions and problems with observational data, and there we want to characterize the bias that we would have in terms of this structure, the Rubin's causal model framework. Okay, so that's the thing. Wait for the next class, and I will take you through an example of what this means in observational data. Anything else? Any other question? Thoughts? You want to discuss something? I want people to I want you all to participate in the class, in the sense that this I feel that economics it's a social science, although we are doing econometrics here, which is a bit more technical, but I think it's a good idea to have a healthy discussion in class among yourselves and me also involved, because that one would help us in not making these sessions boring, because you're also staring at a computer and I'm also staring at a computer. And the other thing is that it will also help us in I think it helps in understanding these things better, having a discussion. And most of the things that I'm going to discuss here are very practical. So for example, the Rubin's causal model and the kind of examples that we will talk about are all very practical questions, like that we face when we do, when you will be doing research or when you have to assess an impact of any policy. In fact, let me tell you, if, by the way, is anybody placed in some, I guess consulting firms will not use this kind of thing, but some of them do. Like for example, PwC, I know, do some kind, they do some impact assessment exercise. Is anybody placed in PwC or?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, some of us
Yes,
are.
sir.
Yeah. So for those people who are now going to join PwC, you will on a daily basis, come across these terms. Okay, they may want you to assess an impact of some program intervention. They do quite a lot of work with governments, state governments, and so so there you have to basically deal with real life problems. Okay, how to assess the impact of these things, and in that sense, all of this is very practical, of very practical applicability. It may not be terribly interesting econometrically. You may not see mathematical objects here, very complicated mathematical objects, but it's a very practical relevance. So I would I hope that you all participate in discussions, and discuss these issues, and in fact propose some problems. Like we can also talk about, like, for example, you have some how would you do something like this if you have a thinking of a problem in your mind and you are trying to think of doing it econometrically, empirically. How would you do that? Because I think that will help a lot in all of us getting more clarity on these things. Okay, so you should, I expect you all to participate. So any other question?
Sir, so I understand why there is a selection bias. That is, you cannot observe the same individual under both the states, right? So
Right.
then the solution around that is simple, right? That you can take very similar groups, like your groups, their composition can be very similar, homogeneous in that sense. And I think that that should solve the problem, right? Practically.
Yeah, right. So that's what we do actually. That's what we do. Um, and in fact, you have outlined, the real value of this framework in what you have said, because only when you think of the problem in this way that you realize that to solve this problem you need to find a group which is comparable, isn't it, in an observational setup. So that's what people do empirically. So you would, of course, when you're working with observational data, you understand that this idea you may, and it's very hard to establish causality, but the way to argue causality in an observational framework is exactly this way, that you would think of a group which is very similar to the treated group, okay, whatever group you are taking as treated, and then compare these two groups,
But
right?
then, sir, then I think there is an inherent contradiction here, because if you want similar groups, at least in social science, those people should be from very similar areas, right? And they're like more likely to be located nearby, and then they can influence each other that way. So that would cause a
Yeah,
problem.
that's true. But like for example, like let's say, let me give you an example. You are right. Mm, there is this very famous twin study. Have you heard of this twin study in the context of US? Where what they do is they want to see, I guess I don't remember the exact problem, but people come up with very interesting ways of dealing with it. So, for example, uh, suppose you want to compare, let's say the educational. So suppose you are interested in seeing whether there is a discrimination between a girl child and a boy child. Okay, in terms of whatever, I mean, you can think of it in terms of education, whether parents discriminate between the girl child and the boy child in how, in their education attainment. Okay, so so that's your treatment. So your treatment here in this case would be whether the child is a girl or a boy, isn't it? And your outcome would be their educational level or attainment. Okay, so you can run a simple regression where your y is the number of years of schooling that they have, or which class they are in, like those kind of things, or their score in a particular class, or how well they perform in math and English and all those things. And then the treatment is whether the child is a girl or a boy, right? So, but of course, you can a comparison group for a girl child cannot be a boy child because they are different on so many other aspects, isn't it? So, so then how will you think of an empirical strategy which sort of appreciates this idea of a potential outcome and then like tease out the causal effect here, which is the discrimination. So these kind of problems here, spillover effect may not that big of a deal because the problem is of the treatment is of a different nature. Whether a child is a girl or a boy, well, in India, that can also have selection bias because there can be systematic abortions. But in a developed country context, in US, let's say, that's not a problem. So in that context, you know, in that context, spillover may not be an issue, but there will be other issues, right? So, but it helps you in thinking out these problems. So suppose you want to compare a girl and a boy, which girl and a boy should you compare in this kind of a situation? You can't compare people from different households. A girl from, let's say, Mumbai is being compared to a boy from Delhi. There would be differences in regions, caste, religion, and so on. So then who do you compare? Should you compare brothers and sisters within a same household? Because in that case, you rule out the possibility of these individuals being from different regions, different backgrounds, different upbringing. So you compare individuals within a same household. Then a better way, but then individual within a same household, one may be elder, the other may be younger. What do you do then? Older versus young, you may have age effects. So then, if suppose you consider only twins, girl and a boy twin, right? So where in that case it's more comparable because these were twins and they are of the same age and supposedly of the same genetic makeup. So in that sense, people come up with identification strategies. So these are called identification strategies in observation. Yeah.
So
Yes.
we don't actually need to do all these things because say all these differences that these the boy and the girl child has
Hmm.
can be accounted for if we take say a particular group of people from all these different regions, from all different kinds of age and all different kinds of background, but we make sure just one thing that the parents take care of boys and girls on an equal level, right?
But
So that
how would you capture that?
maybe by the education expenditure or maybe the survey of the girl and the boy in terms of the treatment from the parents.
Right. That's true. But see, the thing is, so of course, there would be some observable factors which you can control for in your regressions to make them more comparable. But then, wow, econometricians always worry about unobservable factors. Okay. So, for example, ability differences. Okay. Suppose ability varies systematically, with gender, let's say. Okay. So then what do you do? How you econometrician does not observe ability of an individual. So how do you or some individuals by their very nature may be more progressive. Some households, some parents may be more progressive and may not discriminate, but some parents may discriminate. So generally, observable variables are not enough to make these groups comparable. That's the main issue in applied microeconomics. So, and people always worry about unobserved uh, variables. So these identification strategies or these kind of things are generally designed to get around these unobserved factors that may still influence your relationship. But you are right in the sense that you can, condition the comparison that you can control for all these observed things. And to some extent that will reduce the bias in your estimates. Anything else?
No, sir.
That's all. So let's meet next week, Monday, 9:30, right? 9:30 Monday is fine with you?
Sir, I think the timings are now finalized that the Monday class will be on Tuesday 9:30 a.m.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Sorry. I forgot. Tuesday 9:30. Yes.
and for the Wednesday class it will be now on Wednesday 11:30 a.m. I think
Uh,
Romit can confirm.
not so yeah. So do you what do you want to decide right now or you want to send me an email?
Uh,
Sir, we'll send you an email. We don't
yes,
have
sir.
a
Romit will do
confirmation
that.
yet.
Yeah, so send me an email with the final timing that you have, and please do consult the PhD students as well, whether they have is anybody from PhD batch here or can so do consult with them too because if they are attending something else then we want to take that into account. So okay, send me an email. Tuesday 9:30 we will meet and then we will let's go through the selection bias story again and we will go through this example which hopefully will make things clear about what the selection bias is. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Bye, sir.
Thank you,
Right.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, bye.